Hi everyone. So in this video we're going to start talking about making physical data models. The models that we've been making so far have been logical data models, meaning really just entities and the relationships. We haven't thought about things like attributes. And so this week we're going to start thinking about adding attributes to our models and basically making it much more detailed. So when we're going to add an attribute, well here, let me bring up our scenario here. This is basically a bed and breakfast for dogs and cats or pets. And here, you're given this little story about the business rules and what the owner wants to track about the animals and their owners and all that, and the rooms and the amenities at the bed and breakfast. So basically, just like in assignments in the past, you're going to read through a story and kind of pick through the language and make determinations about what needs to be added to the data model. So I'm going to zero in on this paragraph here, and we're talking about the guests, which are the pets, the animals that stay at the B&B. And we're told that the owner, Sandy, wants to track the animal's first name, the nickname, if any, the type of animal that it is, a dog or a cat, the breed, the age, if known, and then like any general comments, like if they have medical needs or need some kind of special care. So that's what we're going to do. We'll just focus on this entity, and I mean, once we get the pattern down, you'll be able to do the rest of them if needed. So I think I'm first going to pull this up. Basically, when we're going to add an attribute, such as the guest's first name, we need really three things: a good descriptive name of that attribute. So for example, if I'm going to be, I'll just type it down here. If I'm going to be adding the first name attribute, I might call that first name. Okay, do you notice I did not use spaces? Don't use spaces in your field names or your attribute names. These are going to translate to fields in your database or columns in your tables. Okay, so don't use spaces. That's the first thing I want to mention. And then also avoid really generic names for your field names or your column names, or attribute names, I should say. Like for example, I could have said name, but like I said, you need to avoid really generic terms like that, because a lot of times these are things like name, date, and stuff like that. Those are reserved words in a lot of database management systems, and you can really run into some tricky problems that are hard to solve. So just be very descriptive and also to the point, and don't use spaces. Another thing I want you to keep in mind is when you're coming up with attribute names, don't use like uncommon abbreviations. Like here's an example of a common abbreviation that would be perfectly acceptable. QTY, everybody knows that that means quantity. Or even something like this. Okay, we all know that means social security number. Here's another one that would be permissible, DOB for date of birth. But I mean, if you're starting to make up your own abbreviations, then you're in trouble. That's not a good idea, because other people have to look at this and understand what you're talking about. So if I was like, oh, first name, perfect, I'll put FN. That is not a good idea, okay? That's not a good field name. So only use abbreviations when they're very common. Okay, so anyway, we have the good descriptive name, and then an appropriate data type. So talking about data type, I would put and I'll do this in Visio, but I would basically put a colon on the model and then specify the data type. And I do have a sheet here that you can use as a guide for choosing data types. Basically, you can, my advice to you is to pick a system and stick with it. You can use these are this in the first column here, these are very common data types that you see like in the big DBMSs like SQL Server or Oracle or MySQL. And you have varchar, which is for variable length strings. That's what we're going to use for the name. It's when you have a string of characters, and it could vary in length. Okay, people's names, pets' names vary in length. So names for things typically vary. So varchar is probably the most common data type you would use. Now, if you want to stick with the Microsoft Access data types, then you'll use this column here. Okay, so pick a column and just stick with it and be consistent. And you know what? Eventually we are going to be building these databases. So if you, if you plan on using Access to build your databases, you're going to be given a choice after we're exposed to a couple more database management systems. But if you're going to be using Access, which a lot of students do because they're familiar with it, they have it installed on their machine already, then go ahead and choose the second column, because those are the Access data types, and that'll make the transition to building your actual databases a lot easier. So getting back to this, so we have varchar, that's for people's names. I'll just whiz through these. Not only people's names, but like descriptions of things, addresses, all of those things vary in length. So varchar, like I said, is probably your most common, or short text if you were using Access. That would be short text, which is 255 characters or less. If you need more than that, then it's going to be long text. And then char is a fixed length string of characters. Okay, so that's the operative word here, fixed in length, like a state abbreviation. They're all 2 characters, so we would use char for that. Okay, and then integer, that's fairly self-explanatory. If you have a number with no decimal place, positive or negative or 0, you can use integers. That might be good for like age or even quantity. That's another integer type of scenario. This one, I have integer, for integer you could write out the word integer or just put int, probably just put int if you're, especially if you're going to be modeling these in Visio. You'll see your Visio models are going to get very crowded very quickly. So we need to conserve space to try to fit everything in. Okay, so anyway, int identity, you'll be using this a lot for like primary keys and like ID numbers. And that's what we call a surrogate key. We talked about that earlier in the semester, but that's basically when the database management system is handling the numbering for us. So for example, if I use this int identity as my data type for the guest ID at the BMB, then the first pet that goes into the table is going to be guest number 1, okay, and then the second guest that goes into the table is going to be 2, and then the third is 3, and so on. So and I don't have to type those numbers in. The database generates them automatically. So that's a very common thing to do, and if you're doing it in Access, you would use auto number. Okay, number is for numbers that may have a decimal component. Okay, so unlike the integer, which would have, it does not allow decimals and it would not accept them. So if you have a number like a GPA, for example, you would use the number type. And then you might see something like this out there. I don't expect you to get this specific in your model, but looking at this, I have 4, 3. That means four digits total in the GPA, but 3 of them are decimal digits. Okay, so like I said, you may or may not see that. I don't care too much that you remember that. Okay, money, that's self-explanatory. Date time, that's for storing dates and or times, okay? Or the date type, it's date time in Access. And then, I don't know if you would use this in our class, but sometimes you might have a Boolean data type in certain database management systems. Some of them don't have it, so but Access has it. It's called yes, no in Access, and that'll allow, Boolean is for storing true, false values. So I think getting back to this one here, the first name of the guest, I would certainly make that a varchar, okay, and then I would specify the max size. We said varchar is for variable length strings, but you do have to specify a max size. So then it becomes a judgment call. There really is no right or wrong answer. At this point, you have to ask yourself, all right, what is the longest name, longest length that the name of a pet could ever have? And I'm thinking, all right, maybe it would probably be 10 characters in reality, but let's leave nothing to chance, and then maybe I'll put 25 in there. So again, there's going to be a lot of like judgment calls on your part, and I get that. So don't be afraid to just make a decision and stick with it. So anyway, we have our good descriptive name, we have our appropriate data type in this case, And then null status. This refers to whether or not you're going to allow that field to be blank. When I enter a guest or a pet in the database, does it make sense that I cannot have a name for that guest? I don't think it does. So again, we have another judgment call situation. You're going to have to think about this. Just use your real world experience, your everyday experience, and make a decision here. So I would say not null in this case, meaning cannot be null. Okay, so I think we'll stop this video, and then in the next video I'll go ahead and model this in Visio.